that's why I feel like the narrative always wins over the truth. And so many people suffer under the narrative, and the narrative is controlled by our media, which programs people, and our history books, which falsely programs people, and the division and our social media programs people against everyone with these selected boxes of prejudice towards everyone, and everyone suffers under the narrative, and we never find the truth, and we also dehumanize each other because the narrative selects so. Like, the narrative decides what actually happened in history, whether slavery, slave ships, Africa, Europe, Indians, Native Americans, the collective populace and those who can fit the most propaganda decide what it is. The Holocaust, whatever world history controls, decide how bad or what it was. September 11th, the narrative decides what September 11th was. The Iraq War, the narrative decides. All of these global events suffer and lose truth under the narrative. Stalin was notorious for having his narrative over the truth, which was he was killing a lot of people. You get what I'm saying? So it's
Kim
like
Jong-il. I mean, yeah, basically.
And what's happening in China now is the narrative that they're not genociding people and that everything is okay, when they're literally locking people down in factories and killing them. It just, to me, it's the most demonic, satanic thing, and it just breaks my heart every day because not only am I ideologically against the narrative, because I'll fight for truth. I don't mind being wrong. If I found out all this shit I think is actually wrong, like there aren't global forces that control the world and it is just mayhem, I will feel so horrible and stupid, but I will be smart enough to admit I was wrong and be like, okay, and now let me start learning and knowing the real truth. The problem is, I just don't think the majority of humanity has that ability to admit when they're wrong and know what the truth is or what the quote unquote narrative is. Oh, what I was saying is, I'm ideologically opposed to the narrative in an ideological sense because I'm searching for the truth, but also because I am personally affected by the narrative, because the narrative decides that I'm a bad person. I'm someone who belongs in, the narrative decides I belong in a mental institution, or I belong in prison, or I belong dead. The narrative takes away my humanity, just like it takes away everyone's humanity. So I know, like Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, Kanye West, Dave Chappelle, whatever you think about these people, is the narrative decides what happens to their humanity. Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, who's someone on the left, J.K. Rowling, liberals who try to do good, but then the narrative takes them over. That to me is the most heartbreaking thing, is that the narrative always wins over the truth. And it's everywhere in life, like even in media. Like the debate of whether Eminem's the greatest rapper or not is all based on, no one actually talks about whether he is or not. It's all just what the narrative says, which is just the mass populace of people.
And I don't know whether it's just me spending a lot of time with you.
Yeah.
Or maybe just spending too much time on Twitter. Mm-hmm. But this whole conversation has just been playing throughout my head personally. Not even us discussing it, to the point where I'm like, oh, of course, North Korea, it's all propaganda. Of course, China, it's all propaganda. Of course, the Great Firewall of China, right? Yeah. That's the firewall where they don't let them actually see the actual internet.
But you would think our government wouldn't do that.
But I believe, our government only does that to, keep bad things away, like CP and stuff, like, which I'm all for keeping that off of the internet.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, but they wouldn't keep anything that's just free speech off the internet. And then the more you dig into it, you're like, oh fuck, well, they are doing that.
The liberal comment is free speech doesn't equal freedom of consequence, which means that if you say something the public doesn't like, they have the right to destroy you. But to me, it's like, what kind of dehumanizing public that diminishes all humanity with that sort of narrative? Because if someone says something you don't like, that doesn't make them a domestic terrorist. That doesn't make them racist. That doesn't make them a pedophile. It just means it's something you don't like. So now you've played this social media game where you want to cancel them and destroy their lives because you think it's for the greater good, because your political ideology has dehumanized everyone. But ultimately, you're just giving into the narrative you believe, and you're not letting other people speak. And if you wonder why it seems like everyone's in a mad dash to control the narrative, it's because that's what's happening, is social media is having everyone collectively all over the world is having this awakening that people think differently of them or differently than them. So what happens is they think, well, is everything I thought about wrong? Is all my existence wrong? So what's happening is truth is subjective. So there's multiple truths. And that goes with every political or ideological or religious or spiritual or philosophical issue. So what happens is when people are confronted with oh my God, my truth isn't the truth. It's just my truth.
I hate that term, my truth.
Narratives start to conflict with each other because people's literal ego and identity and existences are clicking, and that's cognitive dissonance. Like someone who may believe they're the opposite gender, they believe that, and then they put that out to the world, and then if people disagree with them, then their reality is now being clashed with their existence and identity. And that's what's happening all over social media with every opinion, is people's version of their narrative versus another narrative is clashing. So people's identities are firing off. So everyone is in this mad dash to either try to find some universal truth or try to control the world with what their truth is, which is just manipulating a narrative. So it's now people talk about the culture war. It's a war for truth. It's a war for justice. It's a war capitalism versus socialism. It's not. It's a culture war for the narrative. And who controls the narrative? Do the conservatives manipulate the populace into their beliefs? Do the liberals manipulate the populace into theirs? Does socialism narrative win? Does the capitalist narrative win? It's social media has created us having a narrative war. It's the war for the narrative. It's the war for we get to say what's true.
Social media has not created that.
I mean, the internet in general.
No.
Yes, it is.
No, the printing press before it. I mean,
no, but the internet, you can globally you can globally influence the world. You couldn't really
I'm just saying, yes,
you couldn't globally influence the world instantaneously with a tweet anywhere in history up until now, as far as recorded history. Yes. Again, that would be the narrative. If 10,000 years ago you told me everyone was psychic and it was a war for the narrative in psychic consciousnesses, I wouldn't understand that, but I would get into that. But that's what I'm saying, is it's a mad dash towards kind of like the Spice War. You know what I mean? Not the Spice Girls, but
I literally thought you were saying,
I shouldn't have made
like
a joke
when you said like
serious.
The Spice, I really thought you were going to say girls.
Or like the great oil rush.
He allegedly liked them.
You get what I'm saying? It's like people rush for resources because some people believe there's infinite resources and some people believe there's a finite resources. That's why global wars are fought. In the last 20 years, we're just realizing that there's a finite amount of people who will believe a narrative. So it's a mad dash of propaganda and manipulation everywhere. That's why everything's been selling you something. People can't even make movies anymore. They have to be loaded with an ideology. Comics can't make jokes anymore. They have to be loaded with some kind of understatement because everyone is at war for their narrative, because all narratives are at war and conflicting with each other because people's identities are constantly clashing. And that's what it is. And the narrative seems to always win over the quote unquote truth.
I would love to hear Bill Gates and Elon Musk do a debate
but they won't.
population control, eugenics.
But again,
I really want to watch
that could be suspect to certain things being edited out, certain codes being taught.
No,
you
I
don't
mean,
think
if they're sitting
if they
right
were
here
going to do
right
that,
now,
let's say they were, I mean, that would be in the room real, but if it were globalized on television, you don't think there would be speech writers or certain things they could or couldn't say? That's what all of Hollywood is just actors puppeteering as something. And again, that's why music is all now filled with cultural messages. And that's why television shows and even TikTok and Instagram, all of it has ideological messages because humans are at war for the narrative because everyone's identity is clashing. People are realizing, other people believe a different thing. Well, does that mean I'm wrong? And that's what's happening in the world for the last 5 fucking years. And it's driven everyone crazy.
No, it's been that way for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
But it's never gotten hyperspeed the way it has because of the internet.
Hyperspeed, but you keep acting like this just developed.
Okay, there in the 100 years ago, there was a war for the narrative when television started because that was a way to broadcast. And again, the narrative won. They never told the truth on TV. And that's the thing, is they used to be able to control like the narrative, because there was like 20 TV stations and a few radio stations.
5.
Now with everyone, they have such a hard time controlling the quote unquote narrative.
Yes.
They have to do things like Alex Jones or Kanye West or Joe Rogan. They have to play all these Epstein politic games because they can't control the narrative. People are starting to believe, and it creates this crazy technological paranoia. Because no one trusts the government, no one trusts the media, no one trusts society, but they trust some news source. So that's the crazy thing. Everyone doesn't trust everything, but everyone is still programmed and brainwashed by everything.
I wrote a song and made a video that I never released called "We Will Not Allow," which, ironic, isn't that the track we used for the
intro?
Right.
Yeah.
And I
unfortunately,
wrote...
they did allow bankers to come in. They did allow interest and loans and usury to be, which was illegal in all European and I think African countries, but illegal, which is to loan money out and then pay back for more. That was illegal because they knew you could fuck someone's life up by doing that. And it's the number one place it happens in America. I'm not going to say, but that's China or Russia.
There was a music video
or non-Christians
created for it that had some visuals of we're not going to use guns. We're going to use Twitter and Facebook to overcome the narrative. And I was just like down with this whole concept of this song. And then I never released it because I was like, wait a minute, this message could be used for bad.
But that's what I'm saying is
we will not allow doesn't mean
all messages could be used for bad, actually, because that's the funny thing about a narrative is it's also reliant on an interpretation. It's how people interpret it. So that's why it's so funny that no one really trusts any narrative except their own, but they're also being programmed somewhere. Like something is influencing people to, whether it's about COVID or the vaccines or about election rigging and hacking, someone is believing some narrative because people are being programmed, not by the truth, but by whatever narrative is scarier.
I think the smart people don't allow themselves to feel a certain way,
but then they just get forced in because their job or their kids or their family members,
that's a whole nother
eventually
conversation.
Cave into the narrative.
That's a whole nother conversation.
It's not. It's all about the narrative that wins. And the reason I was making this episode and maybe our last session is because when I put myself out in the world, whatever the narrative decides I am will be that. And that's kind of like what happened when I was as a teenager and in 20. If I get famous, the narrative decides what I am, whether I'm a comic, whether I'm a philosopher, whether they think I'm a domestic terrorist, or whether they think I'm just a fucking crazy, weird person. The cultural narrative will decide what I am, not me, not what I really am, and not what I truly am in my soul and spirit, but the narrative.